Welcome to WatchMeCode, Episode 6. In all of the previous episodes that I've recorded, the number one question that I've received is, what tool am I using to have my browser automatically reload every time I save in my editor? And that tool is LiveReload. Now if you head over to LiveReload.com, you can find a lot of information about this project. At its core, LiveReload is really just a tool that watches the file system on your computer and then uses a WebSocket connection to tell your browser to automatically update itself. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than just that. It can do some really cool things like sending a CSS update down to your browser without having to reload the entire page, for example. Beyond that, it can also do things like compile your CoffeeScript, Haml, Sass, or other preprocessors and postprocessors. Now you can find LiveReload in the Mac App Store, and it'll cost you $10 there, but honestly it's worth it. I really can't live without this tool anymore at this point. I love having the ability to just hit save in my editor and have the changes show up in my browser without me having to hit the refresh button. Now there's also a pre-alpha version available for Windows, and it says in the website here that you can use it, but it won't really be clear on how to use it. And for the purposes of this screencast, I'm really only going to show you how to use the OS X version. If you're interested in seeing how this thing really works though, you actually can get the source code directly off of GitHub. Scroll down on the website a little ways and you'll find links to the actual code on GitHub, as well as the different plugins and JavaScript files that it uses to control your browser. Now of course you do want to pay attention to what he says on the website here. There is no formal license attached and you're free to tinker with it, but please don't distribute the binaries without his permission. He expects everyone to pay for this, and honestly it's worth paying for. But there's also one last option of running this for free, and that's to use the Guard LiveReload plugin. If you're a Ruby developer, chances are you're already running Guard, and that's probably going to be a good option for you, but we'll show you that in a little bit. We're going to start looking at the GUI first. Now once you have the project installed, you'll have this nice little compass icon in your system status bar. Clicking on that will bring up the LiveReload GUI. Here you can add projects and configure the projects the way you want. I'm going to go ahead and set up a new project here, and I'm going to point it to the WatchMeCode.net website. Once I've selected that, you can see a lot of configuration options show up. Now the script that shows up inside of here can be added directly to your JavaScript in your application, and that will allow your application to take advantage of a LiveReload server being available. But you don't have to add this code to your application. And personally, I don't want to add this code to my application. Instead, I prefer to use the option of installing browser extensions. You can grab the extension for your favorite browser from this link and follow the download and installation instructions fairly easily. And once you've got that done, you'll see the same little compass icon showing up in your browser over here on the right hand side in Chrome, for example. Now there is one little difference between the icon in the browser and in the status bar, and that's the little slash that goes across the middle here. Right now it's missing in my browser, and that tells me that LiveReload is not currently connected to this browser tab. When we click on this icon though, we can see that the little slash does come across here, and we can see that it's also red. The icon in the status bar is also turned red, and that tells us that we're connected and ready to go. Of course, this isn't the page that I want to be looking at when I have it connected, so I'm going to go ahead and close out these tabs, and I'm going to open up my local web server where I have my website running. I'm also going to move this over to the side so we can see things a little bit easier. And I'm going to open my favorite editor, Vim, here. I'm going to reconnect LiveReload. And let's make some changes real quick. For example, this featured item at the top of the screen can be changed, and when we save, the entire screen refreshed, and you see that the word item showed up. Now if I disconnect LiveReload and then undo that change, you'll see that the page does not reload. I have to go back to my browser and manually refresh it in order to see the change. Reconnect LiveReload, redo the change, and LiveReload is updating the page again. Now, like I mentioned earlier, refreshing the page is only one of the things that LiveReload can do. In this particular project, I'm using Sass for all of my CSS. Frankly, I don't like writing CSS by hand, and Sass makes this a little bit nicer for me to work with. Right now, I've got a guard process set up to do all of the Sass processing for me. It's actually using Compass to do that, by the way. I'm going to go ahead and shut down my web server here so that I'm not using all of my tools to precompile everything for me. I'm just going to run the app.rb by itself, which is going to give us the website, but it's not going to give us any of the processing of the CSS. So when I go back into my editor here, and I changed my background color on my body to be 000, even when I refresh the page, it's not changing the background color because I don't have the Compass process watching the file system and updating the CSS for me. But I can have LiveReload do that for me now. I'm going to open up the GUI again, and inside of my WatchMeCode.net project, I'm going to tell it to go ahead and compile Sass, less, etc., and I'm going to set a few options here. Now, one of the options that I need to set is the Ruby version that I actually want to use. In this case, I'm going to use Ruby 192 patch 318. That's the current Ruby version that I have set up to run this particular project. You can also see in the settings here that there are several compiler settings as well as output paths. And LiveReload was smart enough to see all of the different file types that it can handle within my project. It sees that I have these various HAML files, which I use to write HTML, and it also saw my Sass files, which it recognizes. In the compiler settings, you can tell it whether or not to enable HAML, enable Compass, and give it various options that you want. I'm going to go ahead and leave Compass enabled. I'm going to hit apply, and when I close this and rewrite this Sass file, you should have seen this little icon spinning around a little bit. That was the pre-processing happening. And now the background color of the application has changed. Change that back to white. You saw the little spinning icon, and the background color is changed back. And LiveReload is doing that for me. It's not my guard process running Compass that I had previously been using. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's also a guard plugin for LiveReload, and I typically use guard, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the compiling of Sass, and I'm going to enable the guard LiveReload plugin instead. I'm going to open up my gem file in my project here, and in my development gems, I'm going to add gem guard LiveReload and get that installed. So I'll run my bundle install. And I had previously installed everything, so that went through pretty quickly there. But now I'm going to run guard init LiveReload, and that's going to add some information to my guard file here, which sets up all of the different processes that I'm using. Now, the default that LiveReload sets up in here is based on a Rails application, but I'm not using a Rails app here. I'm actually writing a Sinatra application, so I'm going to change this up a little bit. I don't have an app folder, but I do have a views folder, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. I don't have a helpers folder at all, so I'm going to get rid of that. I do have a public folder, and I definitely want to pay attention to my JavaScript and CSS changes. And I don't have a config or a Rails asset pipeline, so I'm going to kill those. Now that I have those changes in place, when I run guard, after shutting down my previous web server, guard is setting up LiveReload for me. Of course, I've still got the LiveReload GUI running, so let's go ahead and quit that just to make sure that we're not opening a wormhole here by accidentally running two different versions of LiveReload on the same machine. And since I accidentally had both of those running, I need to go ahead and disconnect and then reconnect LiveReload in my browser. Having done that though, I can go and change this HAML file, remove the word items, and when I save it, it refreshes. So this is actually guard running and not the full GUI application running. You can see that I don't have LiveReload up here in my system tray. So that's the basics of running LiveReload, and that's the tool that I use to reload my browser whenever I make a change in my editor. Of course, I've showed you a couple of different ways to do that through the GUI and also through the guard file. And whichever way you use is really personal preference. I tend to use the GUI version because it does have a few more tools and options built into it. But chances are, if you're using Guard already, you've probably got a lot of those options configured in Guard, and you don't really need the GUI. Now, the $10 price tag might seem a little steep for the GUI application as well, and yeah, I can understand that, but honestly, it's worth it. The tool gives me enough productivity improvements and enough saving me headaches and time that I really do like to support the developer, just to show the developer that you support what he does and that it does benefit you.